So today I wanted to talk about one of my favorite surahs in the Quran, and this is chapter 26, the poets, or Surah Shu'ara. And this is a chapter that kind of concerns itself with a series of stories, small sections of stories from various different prophets. And all of this really is to try to console the Prophet Muhammad, who during this time is just going through a lot, basically. He's trying to relay his message, and no one's really listening to him, and he's quite pressed. And so God essentially shows him how all of these other prophets were received by their respective tribes, their community, their nation, etc. And so this story essentially starts from the story of Prophet Moses. Now, Musa's story here is really just a section of the broader story where Musa confronts Pharaoh after God has told him kind of he wants him to go to Pharaoh and relay his message, and then free the children of Israel. And then that's kind of it. That's basically this is what this chapter concerns itself only with that section of the story. And this is just kind of the nature of the Quran, that it doesn't necessarily have a chronology. And I think the Quran has something that other religious texts don't, which is audacity. It really doesn't care whether you want a chronology or you're interested in these names and historical context. It's not going to give you any of that. It's going to tell you straight up what it thinks it's the most relevant and go from there. And so Surah Shu'ara again just concerns itself with just that portion of Moses' story, and then 2 chapters hence from this point in Surah Qasas, we see the actual birth of Moses and his upbringing, his youthful years, and then 2 chapters before this in Surah Taha, we see his conversation with God. And so all of this, it's basically kind of a mess. There's no real chronology here, but this surah has been a favorite of mine since I was a child, and I love Moses. He's my favorite prophet, and this just scene, it's so captivating. It's so well done. And so I wanted to share that. I was thinking about this surah for some time, and so I thought I would, why not share it? So it's a new translation by M.A.R. Habib and Dr. Bruce Lawrence. And so far as I know, Bruce Lawrence is the foremost, I guess, academic authority on the Quran. He's done a lot of work on there, and M.A.R. Habib is also a really good translator. And so they work together here to create a verse version of the Quran, a verse translation of the Quran. I'm trying to maintain the sort of poetic quality of the Quran, but also, I don't think they do that very successfully, but also, make it a little bit lighter to read. It's not reading like a story, like this particular translation by Tarif Khalidi would have it. And then it's also not as dense or as literary as the A.J. Arberry translation of the Quran. But anyway, so we'll go through it, and I'll provide my commentary kind of as we go. All surahs in the Quran begin with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, that is to say, in the name of God, the All-Merciful, the Ever-Merciful. And this is just a sort of general statement that you kind of just say as an opening. And so this particular surah begins with 3 letters, Tha, Sin, and Mim, which are essentially letters from the Arabic alphabet. And you might ask, well, what is that translated? There is no real translation. I think scholars disagree on what the purpose, the meaning of these letters are, because not every surah begins with these kinds of letters. They come in different permutations, but they do exist, and there's no real clarity on my end, at least from my perspective, as to what they mean. We're just going to skip past them. I'm certainly not going to expatiate here and tell you what I think they mean. So we'll move forward. So the second, or the main first verse, God says, "These are the verses of the clear book. Prophet, you would perhaps distract yourself to death, grieving that they won't believe. If we wished, we could send down to them a sign from heaven before which their necks would humbly bow. But as soon as a reminder comes to them from the All-Merciful, they turn away from it. Yes, they deny it, but soon the truth of what they scorn will come true. Don't they see the earth, how many noble species we have caused to grow in it? In this is a sign, yet most of them won't believe. And your Lord alone is the Almighty, ever merciful." And this section of the Quran kind of comes to an end, this sort of narrative, this pre-summary to the actual events of the surah. And what's interesting, when I see the last line, "and your Lord alone is the ever merciful," or is the Almighty ever merciful, this notion, this persistent notion in the Quran of God's monotheistic nature, God repeatedly makes these kinds of statements. وَإِنَّ رَبَّكَ لَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الرَّحِيمُ, your Lord is the great and also the most merciful. These kinds of comments are littered throughout the Quran. And when I see that your Lord is alone, it reminds me of course, the monotheistic nature of Islam. Well, I had recently read a book by, oh my God, I should probably search that up. Wait, I want to give it credit. It was fantastic. Perfect Victims, The Politics of Appeal by Mohammed El-Kurd. And so this is basically about the situation in Gaza. And so naturally I thought, I've listened to a Palestinian perspective, I ought to listen to a Jewish perspective. And so I don't know why, but I picked Josh Hammer's Israel and Civilization. And he makes this comment in this book, Josh Hammer does. He's a political commentator. He's an Orthodox Jew. And this is not necessarily directly related to the events happening in Gaza right now, but he tries to make, as best as he can, a case for Zionism. The actual purpose of the book was how Western civilization is bedrocked or rooted on on Christian values. And Christianity is Judaic necessarily. And as a result, Western civilization cannot divorce itself from its Judeo-Christian roots. And what I found most fascinating is that he then goes on to say that Islamism and wokeism and one other thing, I'm blanking, are the greatest issues of our time and the greatest threat to Western civilization, etc. And I found that so amusing because, in the context of this verse, you God alone is the Almighty, ever merciful. The confirmation of Islam's very staunch monotheism is made, and this is not just made once in this surah; it's made throughout the Quran, and it's quite well known, right? And so the idea that he completely others Islam in his analysis just had me pressed, to be honest, because the idea also that Christianity is Judaic is not wrong, but it is less Judaic than Islam. And it just baffles me. I think that if Josh Hammer even did a rudimentary analysis into what Islam was, he would have a bit more of an awareness on that front. That Judaism has far more in common with Islam than it has ever had with Christianity, especially from a theological perspective. And tying this back to this verse, there is, of course, the notion of the staunch monotheism. I think Judaism and Islam are very, very clear and staunch monotheistic religions that do not tolerate any of the, there is potentially a son of God or, Mary, the mother of God. Like those kinds of notions are just unacceptable. They're not permitted in the religion. Whereas, our Christian brothers and sisters, Christianity kind of veers off a little bit into the ether there with the Trinity. Not every denomination is like this, but when we talk in the context of the average Christian, this is certainly something that can be conceived of. He doesn't really regard that. When you even listen to Musa ibn Maimon or Moses Maimonides make that very clear that Islam is very staunchly monotheistic, and so he tries to portray Christianity as being like the bosom friend of Judaism. And I find that funny. I think it comes from a very cultural, political perspective as opposed to a theological one, because again, like I said, Judaism has far more in common with Islam than Christianity. And then, there's just anecdotal evidence of that, and then there's scriptural evidence for that. I remember when I was a kid, my mom, my mom is Muslim. And so when she would ask me, to go to the grocery store and pick something up, she would invariably ask, look to see if there's a halal sign. If there was no halal sign, she would say, well, look to see if there's a kosher sign. If there's a kosher sign, you're good and you can eat it. And I remember that just being kind of something you just knew. And even in the context of the Quran, there is a time and place where God essentially instructs the Muslim people and tells them that they are permitted to eat the meat slaughtered by a Jew, but not by a Christian, because Jews and Muslims have very similar slaughtering practices. That is to say, the knife has to be very sharp, the animal can't be diseased. When you're slaughtering, the windpipe, the esophagus, the jugular, all of that has to be slaughtered at the same time, and the blood has to be completely drained because they're not permitted to drink blood, and so on and so forth. And so they're very similar. And so the idea, those are just very small examples that I'm giving. Sorry, this was just on my mind. This is a complete diversion, and I probably will put like a timestamp or something. You can skip past this. But it just really pressed me, the idea that he others Islam when it's the closest religion to Judaism in terms of practice, in terms of theology, and that he is so, it's Judaism and Christianity against Islam. It's absolutely ridiculous to me. But anyway, I'm digressing. Then essentially, so after this section is over, we get to section 2. And one of the things that I also want to point out before I continue is that the God of the Quran, it reminds me of that book by Auerbach in Mimesis, where he essentially tries to run contrasts between how Homer used to write and how the Bible is written. And that Homeric clarity, he contrasts the Homeric clarity with the biblical depth that comes from a lack of detail. Whereas Homer constantly would talk about every single minor detail, whereas the Bible does not, it dispenses with that. The Quran does that, I think, but even more so than the Bible. And so you'll see that so much of the detail is actually missing from the Quran, and we're going to try to essentially piece it together and interpret. And it adds a very sublime and it adds a lot of depth to the Quran, similarly as it does in the Bible. So anyway, section 2. So God is speaking to Moses. He says, when your Lord called to Moses, go to the people who do wrong, the people of Pharaoh, will they not be mindful of God? And Musa responds, he says, my Lord, I fear that they will say that I am lying. My chest will tighten and my tongue will falter, so send Aaron also. Besides, they have charged me with a crime, and I fear that they will kill me. And I think it's worth mentioning here the order of operations, how Musa essentially shares his lack of comfort. He begins first with saying that I fear that that they'll say that I'm lying, and then my chest will tighten and my tongue will falter. Now, there's different interpretations about this. Some people will say that his chest has tightened because Musa, famously, or maybe not so famously, he was quick to temper, and so he knew that if he went to Pharaoh and Pharaoh said that you're bullshitting, basically, that he would get angry, and he wouldn't be able to control himself, and his tongue would thicken, and he wouldn't be able to talk properly. But also, it could just be that it's general anxiety. He's anxious because another thing that is true about the Musa in the Quran is he has a little bit of a stutter, and so he's worried that maybe he won't be able to articulate himself very well. And so you see a very human side of Moses trying to navigate those anxieties, his lack of confidence here. And so he asks God, can you please send my brother Aaron or my brother Harun with me, please? Because Harun was very well known to be a wonderful orator. He could speak very well. Then he gets to his last concern. So we kind of go in sequence. So his first concern is that they're going to call him a liar, and he's going to get mad. His second concern is that as a result of that madness, that irritation, that frustration, he's going to start to stutter, and he won't be able to convey the message properly. And then his final concern is that besides, they have charged me with a crime, and I fear that they will kill me. And this is that very famous crime that he committed, where he killed a Coptic or an Egyptian man who was trying to seemingly hurt a member of the tribe of Israel. And Musa trying to defend that guy, accidentally unaware of his own strength. If I were to paint a portrait, he's described as a man who's exceptionally strong. Like, that was one of God's gifts to Moses. And he had a stutter, like I mentioned, and he was quick to temper a little bit, but very good and very good, morally erect individual. Anyway, so he says that so he tries to defend this member from the tribe of Israel, his own tribe, and then accidentally, unaware of how strong he actually is, he ends up killing him, basically. He ends up knocking him out and killing him. And so he's very aware that one of the close chieftains of the Pharaoh, who is friends with Musa, has told him that if he comes back, he's going to get killed. So he's really worried about that. But notice how that's the last thing. The last thing, he's not really worried. So I guess to the believer who is reading this book, what is the lesson here? That you believe in God, you follow his message, irrespective of the other fears. But also, not only does it tell you the extent of his devotion, but it also humanizes Musa because he begins his thing by telling him about the anxiety that he has, which is a very natural human response. And so there's kind of two ways in which you can interpret this. You could interpret this as Musa's lack of concern for his corporeal health, because the mission of God is far more important to him than that. But also that for him, the anxiety of speaking and going up to Pharaoh kind of supersedes that anxiety of dying, essentially, of being harmed, physically harmed. But anyway, so God then responds. God says, never. You both go with our signs, and we will be listening to you. Now, in Arabic, the version is قَالَ كَلَّا فَاذْهَبَا بِآيَاتِنَا. Essentially, it's saying, don't worry about it. It's not a no, don't worry about it in a dismissive sense. It's a very comforting kind of, no, don't worry about it. I got you. You're fine. God obviously loves Musa. And then he tells him, if you're really that anxious, take your brother Aaron. I'm happy to have you go with him. But also take these signs, these miracles. I'll put them in your pocket as well. And you take those and you head off to Pharaoh. This is the task. So he says, go present yourself before Pharaoh, both of you, and say, we bring a message from the Lord of the universe that you send with us the children of Israel. And this section kind of then ends. And then we skip, basically, and we get to the point where Pharaoh responds. And you're probably wondering, we've skipped quite a bit. We actually don't really know where we're situated here. Whether Musa has already shared that, his message with Pharaoh, and Pharaoh is responding, or this is the first thing Pharaoh says when he sees Musa. So Pharaoh retorts, "Did we not nurture you as a child among us, and did you not stay among us for many years of your life?" So almost retorting, that's really ballsy of you to come here and say all this crap when I raised you in my personal inner court. You were my adopted stepson. You were rolling in dough, and keep in mind, for a modern audience, Musa was effectively a multimillionaire. And so he kind of begins to throw these things back at Moses, as if to kind of shame him a little bit. And keep in mind that the court of Pharaoh is still present. They can still hear this conversation. This is not an independent, closed conversation, as we will see. He continues. He says, so yet you committed that deed, ungrateful as you are. And note how here also Pharaoh does not mention that he killed anyone. He just says, that deed that you did? Do you remember that deed that you did? Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. Notice how creating that moral asymmetry by kind of remarking that I know what you did, and you know what you did. So it's crazy that you're making these kinds of comments, knowing what you did. You killed that man, but I'm not going to say it because obviously I'm not that bad of a person. Look around here, but we have an audience. Anyway, Musa responds to this, and he says that I did it at a time when I was astray. And notice also that Musa does not necessarily bring up this his conduct himself. He also does not say that he killed a person. And maybe in this is a lesson that after Musa essentially prays to God for forgiveness, it's resolved and he kind of moves on. But he also says that I did it at a time when I was astray. He does not say that I was led astray. He says that I was astray, taking kind of responsibility or onus for his actions. But then he continues. He says Then I fled from you when I was afraid of you, but my Lord granted me wisdom and made me one of the messengers. That the implication here that he's obviously not afraid anymore. This is the favor you have done me, that you enslaved the children of Israel but spared me. All this to say, kind of retorting back at him very sarcastically that, like, what do you want? A prize for that? Prize for kind of keeping me in your court and raising me while you've enslaved all of this whole group of people, this nation of people? Like, what do you want? A prize for that? Like, should I be really grateful for you? Like, this is not exemplary conduct by any means. And so then there's kind of a pause, and Pharaoh pivots a little bit. And he then says, in a kind of, I would say this is more of a rhetorical sense. He's not actually interested. He doesn't really give a shit. But he says, what is this Lord of the universe that you're talking about? Like, go on. Yeah, like, just get to the point. Why are you here? Like, what is this Lord of the universe that you're talking about? Now, Musa, not taking this rhetorically, actually responds, and he says, the Lord of the heavens and the earth, and all that lies between them, if only you could be convinced. And there is a kind of a dig here, because the pharaohs and the Egyptians used to believe in the sun god. And so the idea that where your god resides, the seat of your god, is owned by my master. That entire domain is owned by my master. And of course, Pharaoh himself thought that he was God on earth. And so it's kind of both where Pharaoh thinks he is God, that this, natural earthly domain is also, this terrestrial domain is also mastered and owned by my God. And so then Pharaoh, obviously kind of taken aback by this, says to those around him, do you not hear what he says? As if to say, is everyone listening to this? Like, this is crazy. And Musa, aware, but obviously not caring, continues. He says, he's the Lord of your forefathers. And Pharaoh, in response to this, looks to the crowd and says, your messenger, the one sent to you, is surely a madman. So we're increasing the accusation in gradations. First, is everyone hearing this? To, is this guy not crazy? He's an absolute madman. And now Musa, still not bothered, still not caring. He's still on his own train. He's still talking. He says, Musa went on, Lord of the east and the west and all that lies between them, if only you could understand, or if only you could reason. And again, here is another dig where Nouman Ali Khan puts it really nice, where he says that essentially what he is saying is where your God, my master owns, where your God rises and sets. And at this point, Musa is not just talking to Pharaoh, he's talking to the audience, the viziers and the chieftains and all of Pharaoh's major generals are all in this hall, in this court. And Pharaoh, recognizing that up until this point, I think I want to point out two things, is that up until this point, Aaron has said nothing. And this kind of speaks to the fact that God, when he tells Musa, don't worry about it, you got this, he kind of knew that he would never need Aaron, but just to kind of appease him, he sends Aaron anyway. That's the first point. The second point, the other voice that's missing here is no one in the court has yet said anything about Pharaoh. They're watching this entire interaction, and no one has said anything. And so some of the interpretation that I've read is that, well, obviously Pharaoh was a dictator, and all of these viziers, these chieftains, they're employed by a dude they don't really like. So when you see a person who you don't really like particularly get grilled, then you're gonna be silent. You're gonna just kind of watch the situation, how it pans out, because you don't want to say anything, but at the same time, you're kind of chuckling at it. Why not let him get grilled, basically. And I suspect that Pharaoh notices that no one has yet said anything in his defense, and this man just came into the court. His stepson or his adopted son has just come in and grilled him in front of everyone else, and no one has from his own court has defended him in the least. So at this point, you'll see that Pharaoh has now gotten angrier. And it's demonstrated in the following statement, because like any person who is now losing a debate, he shifts from just verbal commentary, verbal comments, to now making physical threats. So he says, Pharaoh said, if you take anyone but me as a god, I shall have you imprisoned. There's an implication in the original Arabic here where it's not as though he's saying that you're going to be you're going to be imprisoned, but you're going to be imprisoned like some other people as well. Like, so this is already taking place, and so you're going to be next, essentially. And so Musa then responds back and says, well, even if I bring you something, even if I bring you some kind of a convincing proof. Now, also keep in mind that Musa in Pharaoh's palace right now is not come with anything. He just has a staff, and he's here with his brother Aaron. And so when he says, can I, even if I bring you something convincing, and Pharaoh retorts, well, bring it then if you speak the truth. He's kind of mocking him to say, well, where is it? I don't really see anything on you, but go ahead. And then Musa, all of a sudden, so Moses threw his staff, and behold, it became quite plainly a snake. Now, so far as I know from other sections of the Quran, it's not just a regular snake, it's a massive python, and it's white. It's very white. And Nouman Ali Khan also makes a comment on this in one of his khutbahs, that, when we read these stories, this is such a well-known story. When we read these stories, we kind of remove ourselves from the actual event or the action. And we just kind of take it as, there's a snake in the building with them. But, you have to appreciate how the court would have received this miracle, right? Like the other day I was in the trails and a grasshopper leapt on my leg and I damn near screamed, right? And this is a whole ass python. And so you can imagine that even if these men trying to maintain their masculinity, their sense of masculinity, don't scream very loudly, they sure as hell have all gasped and moved back, right? Looking at this spectacle, Pharaoh is probably, kind of hopped on his throne, looking down at what the heck is just happening. And then he continues, and he drew out his hand, and behold, it gleamed white for all to see. So you have the white snake and the white hand. And so essentially, the attention is being drawn now away from the snake back to Musa with his white hand. And then that's when the section ends. What can be inferred about what happens after? Likely, all of these people, all the courtesans, the chiefs, the servants, probably go home to their wives and their kids, and they share how Pharaoh basically got owned today at the court. And this entire the story gets spread around to the neighboring to the neighbors, and next thing you know, all of Egypt knows what happened to Pharaoh and how he was shamed. And so, in the following section, you get to see Pharaoh kind of assemble a PR team, a PR strategy to kind of get this resolved so he can get back his authority. And so section 3 commences, and it's not clear to us when this takes place, whether it was the same day, the following day. We have no context about that. But God says he brings all his advisors together in this section, and he says to them, Pharaoh said to his courtiers around him, this is indeed an expert magician. And the implication here, in the original Arabic, is not that he's, trying to get their advice, or he's just making a casual statement. It's more of he's an expert magician, right? Like, we're on the same page. Like, this is the narrative. He's an expert magician. He's not, a messenger of God. And so he's kind of talking with his team to kind of get that message cemented, figuring out essentially how they're going to be approaching this. What is the narrative that they're going to share with the Egyptians and the Israelites in the coming days? And then he adds a section. He says, so Pharaoh said to the courtiers around him, this is indeed an expert magician. He wants to drive you from your land by magic. What do you advise? So keep in mind also that Pharaoh is a dictator. And this is the first time he's probably talking about the land as a shared entity. So he's talking to his advisors saying, well, this is really interesting. I feel like you should take this as a threat for your land, our land. Like making it all of a sudden a shared, almost, mimicking a diplomatic approach here. So he then asks, probably something Pharaoh never asks, is what do you advise? So he's asking his chief advisors, he probably never consults, is what do you advise, knowing his dictatorial tendencies. He reaches out to them quite uncharacteristically, I would say, and says, what do you advise? And so they respond and say, well, detain him and his brothers while you send scouts to the cities together and bring before you all the expert magicians in the land. And keep in mind also that in the Arabic, in this particular sentence, I think the word is ijra, which means to hold something in your mouth, to chew it, but not necessarily allow it to swallow. So essentially the advice from the chieftains is, keep Musa and Aaron or Harun close to you, but don't worry about it. Don't worry about them too much. Just keep them pressed a little bit, be aware of them, know where they are. But at the same time, start to collaterally prosecute and get all of these magicians over in. And so essentially what the plan is, from what we can infer, is that they are going to hold a competition of sorts between those major expert magicians and Musa, and these expert magicians are going to out magician, out sorcerer Musa, and essentially Musa is going to look like an idiot. And that's kind of what the plan looks to be. And so the magicians were gathered at an appointed time on an announced day, and the people were asked, will you too gather? And they replied, we might follow the magicians if they prevail. And so this is just an awareness, an interjection where, it's very clear that this event is being shared with the people, and the people, all of Egypt, is encouraged to join so that Pharaoh can repair his image. Magicians that have traveled from afar have come to Egypt, and so they naturally approach Pharaoh and say, there'll be an award for us, of course, if we win, right? Like you're paying us, right? Like we didn't just leave Lebanon to get here, and you're telling us that we're not making any money. And so Pharaoh, being as brilliant as he is, he says, of course, you will be among my inner circle. And he's aware, and this is not just a tactic, this is virtually a tactic of every dictator, kind of buying people by essentially promising them higher positions if their seat is secured. So now we skip to the event, and the date where the events are actually taking place. And Musa said to them, throw down whatever you want to throw. Do whatever magic you want to do and demonstrate essentially your competency. And so they threw their ropes and their staff, saying, by the might of Pharaoh, it is we who will win. This is very likely something that Pharaoh has included as part of their speech, because you don't want the magicians to just win. You want the magicians to say that it is through Pharaoh that we have won, to reassert his dominance, his leadership, not only in Egypt as Pharaoh, but as God of that region. And then Musa threw down his staff, and it soon devoured their concoctions, almost swallowed up, is certain translations you'll see swallowed up, like instantaneously swallowed up their concoctions. And then the magicians fell down prostrate exclaiming, "We believe in the Lord of the universe," to which probably, Pharaoh, probably remarking in his mind, saying, "Well, hell yeah, you do. Of course you believe in me." And then they kind of further specify and say, "Actually, we believe in the Lord of Moses and Aaron." Rabbi Musa wa Harun is what they say in the Arabic. Now, obviously for Pharaoh, this is the final straw. And so now he's just absolutely livid. So he says, "You believed in him before I gave you permission. He must be your elder who has taught you magic." And obviously this is absurd. Again, we've sourced these magicians from all across the land. And he could not have possibly taught all of these people. But soon you shall know. I shall cut off your hands and feet on either side and crucify you all. And to this the magicians respond. They said, no harm shall befall us. We shall turn back to our Lord. We hope our Lord will forgive us our sins, since we were the first to believe. And end scene. Essentially, that chapter is over. And what can we infer from the end of this section is that at this point now, this is the Quranic interpretation, is that Pharaoh, takes all these sorcerers and these magicians and begins to mass slaughter them. And God tells Musa, "We inspired Musa, travel by night with my servants, for you will be pursued," as kind of a preemptive precaution, saying that once this mass slaughtering of the sorcerers is done, Pharaoh will come for you. So you better leave Egypt, take Bani Israel, or take the children of Israel with you. Then we get to the fourth and final section. So when Pharaoh sent scouts to all the cities, saying, "These Israelites are a feeble band of men, yet they have enraged us, and we are a large force on full alert. So we expelled the Egyptians from their gardens and springs, their treasures and noble homes, and so it was, and later we made the children of Israel their heirs." And so, of course, the idea being that, God, he made promises to the people of Israel, to the children of Israel, and just letting them know that, yes, he expelled them from Egypt, but ultimately he was going to give them great privilege. But as the sun rose, Pharaoh's forces pursued them. And when the two hosts saw each other, Moses' companions exclaimed, "We're about to be overtaken." Musa responded, "No, my Lord is with me, and he will guide me." And so we see again Moses' unwavering submission to God. And even when, the other Bani Israel are stressed about, Pharaoh taking over, Moses is quite steadfast, and he knows that God is going to help him. "We then inspired Moses, strike the sea with your staff. So it parted with each side like a mighty mountain. And we brought the others near. And so we delivered Moses and all those who were with him." And I think it's worth mentioning that in this context, God, he makes it very clear that it's not just all of those that came with Musa, all of them were saved. Because it's perfectly conceivable to think that in this entire commotion, maybe a child veers off and drowns, or something like that, or someone gets afraid and has a panic attack and leaves. But no, I think he stresses that all of them were saved. And we drowned the others, I guess is the second half of this portion. He says, "And we drowned all the others, and in this is a sign. Most of them won't believe, and your Lord alone is almighty, ever merciful." And this is kind of where the story of Musa wraps up. This particular section of Musa's story wraps up. And of course, we end off kind of where we started, with God, again, reinforcing his sovereignty, his might, his mercy, but then also the fact that he is a one God. He doesn't have partners. He is alone. But anyway, I thought I would share that. I've really enjoyed this surah, and I hope that you enjoyed following along with me. This is a very long video, I'm realizing. I've yapped quite a bit, but I hope that I would encourage you to pick up this translation. I think it's a little bit easier. It's not too dense. I read the Bible some time ago now. I don't fully recall the story of Exodus. I do have a very nice copy of the Torah, which I recently acquired. I mean, look at this. Well, not recently. It's been a year now, but look at this volume. Oh my God. And I don't know who published this. But look at that. And there's some gorgeous images in here. I'm inspired, I think, actually, let me just show you the first page. That's stunning. And so I'm actually inspired to maybe reread Exodus and kind of see how refresh my memory on how the biblical account goes. Because I think that for the most part, the Bible and the Quran are very similar in their telling of Musa. There might be slight deviations, but for the most part, the substance is the same. It's not clear in the Quran whether Musa makes it to the homeland or not. In the Bible, though, it's very clear he's not. He can see it, but he doesn't go. He's not permitted to go. But anyway, I hope that you enjoyed that, and it's probably very rambly and me just making a comment. But hopefully, you had an appreciation. You kind of got a glimpse of kind of how the Quran sounds. I think that in the West, the Quran has not had a whole lot of an influence on the Western canon, but in the East, it certainly has. And I think it's sometimes dismissed, or most people are aware, they have a conception of the Quran. Maybe they should read it, but they don't actually ever end up reading it. And in large part, it's because I would say it's more difficult to read in the Bible because there's just so much complexity of what's taking place in the Prophet's life and the actual story. But generally speaking, I mean, it's not terrible. It's not terrible, and hopefully you kind of got a glimpse of that. And of course, if you follow an Abrahamic religion, then it's probably easier for you already because you're already acquainted with so many of the prophets and the stories that are common to all three religions. But anyway, hopefully you enjoy that, and thank you for watching.